Hello, welcome back. In the previous series of videos related to Azure and Cosmos DB, so we have seen the details specific to Cosmos DB, why we are using Cosmos DB, and what are the different options that we have in Cosmos DB for creation of APIs, API-based support that Cosmos DB is providing. And also we have seen throughput and partitioning concepts, how to choose a partition key also we have seen. But in this video, let us specifically see or conclude what are the partition key best guidelines. So when you're going to create a Cosmos DB, so you need to create or choose a partition key when you're going to create a Cosmos DB container. So before creating a container itself, so we need to decide the partition key. So that is this becomes very important because the entire Cosmos DB performance with respect to the latency and other factors is dependent on the partition key. If you're choosing a wrong partition key, so then you will definitely have a lot of issues with respect to the performance and latency. So this is very important concept, I would say, when you are working with Cosmos DB. So let's get started. But before getting started, if you haven't subscribed for this channel, please do subscribe and press bell button for instant notification. Yeah, let's get started. So as you can see, this is the only slide that we will be explaining in this video, but we will go in detail one by one and explain why we are considering these points when we actually call it as a partition key best guidelines, right? So now let us consider the point number one. That is, partition key once defined cannot be changed. So this is a thumb rule, right? So whenever you are creating the partition key, you need to be very careful. You need to do a proper data analysis, proper kind of this is a deciding factor, right? So once this is decided and you go and create a Cosmos DB container, you cannot change it. Okay, no matter what, you cannot change it. The only option that is left out is you need to create a different container and move the data, but that is a painful process if you are working in a production scenarios. So you need to change a lot of connections, a lot of downtime there might be there. So that is not a feasible thing, right? So this is very important. So choose the partition key because very carefully, because it can never be changed once the container you specify the partition key in the container, right? Yeah. So next, point number two, understand your data. So why we need to understand the data is, suppose there are like different attributes as we have seen in the previous video. If you have not seen, I recommend you to see the previous video in the playlist where we are explaining how to choose the partition key, right? Basically, if there are like different attributes, what attributes you need to consider, right? And why you are considering that attribute. So that becomes very important. For example, you might be having a customer ID, customer name, when he has done the transaction, what is the region he has done the location he has done the transaction, what is the transaction ID, transaction timestamp, all those things will come into picture, right? So among all of these, which is the eligible partition key, right? So for that, you need to take data, maybe for a good amount of data, I would say 15 days, 1 month of data, and analyze how the data is spread across. And based on that, you can decide which is the best. This is basically your understanding the data, right? And understand the queries. So when I say understand the queries, so these queries, maybe when you dump the data into Cosmos DB, right? So on top of that Cosmos DB, you'll be having some reporting things running on top of that, or you might be having some queries, right? Which will pull the data from the Cosmos DB. So in that case, you need to understand like what exactly the queries are doing. So what are the where conditions? What are the filters? What are the column level filters? So basically, on top of what exactly the reports are built. So once you understand that, right, so that also helps in deciding the partition key. If there is, say for example, if there is a column that is more frequently used in the query, right, so that column might be eligible for the partition key, right? So this is the point number three. Going to point number four, so you need to choose the partition key such a way that you distribute, I mean, after the data starts going into the logical partitions, right, as we've seen in the previous video. So once we start putting the data in Cosmos DB container, so that logically that will divide the data into multiple logical partitions. So after it divides into multiple logical partitions, so the data should evenly distribute, okay, across all the partition. So it cannot be like, obviously it cannot be like very all the logical partitions will not have equal data, but at least similar data. So that's what we call it as a high cardinality. So as much as possible, you should maintain the high cardinality here. So the next point here is like best to choose attribute which is having a distinct values. So the best example is any ID values. Suppose there is a customer ID, employee ID, vehicle registration number ID. So those kind of things will uh, have distinct values definitely, and that will distribute the data into multiple logical partitions, right? So in that way you will have a good performance and the latency will be very less. So the next option is design your query to hit different partitions. So here we are just understanding the queries, right? But here we are designing the queries. That means the data is already in the we have already created a container and we've already dumped the data into Cosmos DB. But after that also, whenever you are creating a queries, right? So you have to write a queries in such a way that it has to hit maximum partitions. Otherwise, as you have seen in the previous videos, there might be a possibility of creating a hot partitions. So the hot partition might get created. So in that case, only one or two partitions will get into a hot partition, and they will get overloaded with the uh, basically the load that we are putting on top of that. So that we need to avoid by designing the queries. Or you can also have a schedules, right? If there can be different schedules. So if you want to have 10 queries, you can define those all the 10 queries in different schedules. So in the production scenarios, otherwise you can distribute the queries in different time slots. So if you're running all the queries which are hitting into a particular partition at a time, so then definitely it will create a hot partition. So just plan that accordingly with respect to schedules and with respect to how you write the queries, right? And maximum data size. So what we're talking about is the document size. When I say document size, each record or each item that we call it as in the Cosmos DB, so that should not exceed 2 MB. That will not exceed 2 MB. Okay. And also with respect to the logical partition. So anyway, this we cannot control, right? So this is happening in the behind the scene. So automatically, if the 20 GB is exceeded, so it'll create a different logical partition, but that will have a performance issue on top of our queries or our reports which are running. But definitely, so design a logical partition or choose a partition key, making sure that so that data which will be stored in that logical partition will never go beyond this 20 GB. So this is to be considered when you are again choosing the partition key. So these are the different points. So just keep in mind. So when you are basically designing a partition key, or so these are considered as a best guidelines, so that you need to keep in mind when the partition key is to be decided. So hope this was useful. Thanks for watching.